What's up everyone, this is Kane Frequency here, and today I want to talk about the Galaxy S23 Ultra. I've been using it for about 2.5 months now, and I can safely give my full complete thoughts on it. Apologies for the really late video. I've been back in school again and a lot of the assignments been piling up, and it caused me to back up on making a few of my videos. But now that everything's winding down, I can finally make the videos that I've wanted to create for a bit. But that's not the main topic of this video. Topic of this video is the Galaxy S23 Ultra, and I have to say that it has been an amazing experience using this phone, especially coming up from last year's model. If you think this is the same phone as last year's model, that is definitely not the case. Everything is smoother, faster, and much more efficient. I know it definitely does look like the exact same phone, especially because, I mean, it kind of is. But when you take a little bit of a deeper look at all the stuff that Samsung improved underneath, you'll find a lot more to like about it, especially considering the fact that we've had improvements to the battery and the processor, which were most of my complaints of last year's model. We did get improvements to the camera with the 200 megapixel sensor, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Now, just because those are some great improvements, does that mean you should just go out and upgrade to the S23 Ultra, especially for those of you that are coming back from the S22? Well, that's what we're here to find out. So as usual, without further ado, let's get into it. But before that, if you guys like this video or any of the other content on my channel, make sure to like and subscribe. It'll really help me out a lot. So let's get back to it. Taking a look at the S23 Ultra from a design standpoint, you might think that you'd be looking at the S22 Ultra, and to be honest, you'd be mostly 100% right. You kind of are. The only thing that's different are some subtle but noticeable changes once you actually are able to get your hands on one. It's a lot more comfortable to hold with the flatter sides. On the S22, you had these curved edges that kind of dug into your palms a little bit, but with the flatter sides, they kind of just rest there. And it's not that it's too much of a difference, but it does, for some reason, make it a little bit more comfortable. Not to mention the design language is a little bit more on the matching side, considering that now the sides match a little bit more with the top and bottom parts of the phone. The volume rocker and the power button are still in the exact same places as they were last year, along with the S Pen silo. You still have your 6.8-inch AMOLED display, but this time the colors are a little more muted. It's not that the punchiness of the Samsung displays are completely gone, but it does seem like they kind of toned it down just a little bit. It's probably because they're trying to emphasize a bit of the more image editing side, considering that they've been pushing Photoshop on the S23 series a little bit harder than they did on the S22 series. For the most part, the internals are the same. The only exception comes from two of the biggest changes they made to the S23 Ultra, which is the Snapdragon Gen 2 and the 200 megapixel sensor, and along with one other extra one, which happens to be a slight change in the memory configurations depending on storage size. For storage sizes, the 128 gigabyte is no more, and the only thing you have now is the 256, the 512, and the 1 terabyte model. And back to those memory configurations, they brought the 8 gigabyte RAM configuration to the 256, and now the 12 gigabyte is on the 512 and the 1 terabyte. Most of these changes have made the S23 Ultra have a much better experience, and it's been a joy to use, especially a lot of the improvements that came to improving One UI 5.1. The camera was one of the biggest changes from the S22 to the S23 Ultra. We're talking about a massive 200 megapixel wide angle sensor. Now, I expected a lot of improvements with a lot of those large numbers, but to be honest, that's kind of not what we got. I honestly believe that most people probably wouldn't even notice too much of a difference here on the S23. It takes some really great photos, especially when you take a look at some of the general still shots or even portrait shots. Everything just has more added detail, specifically attributed to that 200 megapixel sensor. The only problem here is that I still get a lot of that over sharpened image that I usually get from any of my Samsung devices. Same with the video camera. It also was a slight disappointment to me, and that's because I expected more of an improvement, especially in this area. more so than just still photos. I can kind of say that the video quality is kind of identical to last year. I think the only thing that I noticed is that it's slightly better at autofocusing, and it's much more consistent with letting in light. Don't get me wrong though, while there are a lot of improvements here to particular areas, I don't really think that it was as big a leap as I expected it to be, and I think most people would hardly tell the difference. One of the other most notable improvements to the S23 Ultra come from my personal favorite, and one of the reasons why I decided to upgrade from the S22 to the S23, and that is its performance. The Snapdragon Gen 2 gave the S23 Ultra a much needed power boost, especially this version modified specifically for Samsung. That's not to say that the S22 Ultra wasn't fast enough or it didn't perform decent enough. It's just that with this iteration, you can see some really visible improvements. The performance of the S23 is much smoother in its general use. There's no more stutter when opening apps or swiping across to different home screens. And a lot of that can be attributed to Samsung's improvements in their animation work, but the Snapdragon Gen 2 definitely helped a lot in this area. Another area that caught my attention was gaming. When running something like Genshin Impact on the S22 Ultra, I was getting maybe around 40 to 50 frames per second until I used my S23 Ultra, which then I was getting about 50 to 60, and that was on average. That's a pretty good 10% increase in performance, and honestly, everything just feels much faster to use. Even just opening up the game itself is a lot quicker. As I was saying earlier, on the S23 Ultra, I was able to get around an average of 50 frames per second. And for the most part, it stuck to 60, except when it got into certain situations where things were a little bit more hectic. Even when the thermals hit higher peaks, the performance stayed relatively the same, and it honestly didn't feel as hot to the touch as when I was using my S22. On the S22, things would heat up pretty quickly as soon as I practically opened Genshin Impact, and by then, maybe about 2 to 3 minutes into playing, you can kind of feel the heat just radiating off the S22 Ultra, and at that point, the speeds would drop, or the frames would drop from maybe the average I was getting around 40 to 50 to sometimes into the 30s. Balancing power and efficiency was the goal here, and Samsung definitely succeeded. But performance isn't the only place where the effects of the Snapdragon Gen 2 could be felt. You can also see it in the battery life as well. I will say I was definitely impressed with what the S23 Ultra had to offer, especially in terms of improvements when it comes to things like performance. But one of the other ones that I was most impressed by was the battery life. Even after using it for a few months, it's still fantastic, and it offers probably the longest battery life I've ever used on a Galaxy device in recent memory, or even any Android phone for that matter. At 120 Hz, I was able to get about 9 hours and 14 minutes with the always on display off. With the always on display on, I was able to get about 7 hours and 2 minutes. Now these are fantastic times and much more improved from last year, especially considering the fact that on the S22 Ultra, I was getting about 5 to maybe 6 hours screen on time. And with these times, I was able to get at least 40 to 50% charge at the end of every day. Now, as usual, I also turned down the refresh rate to 60 just to see how long it will last. And with the always on display off at 60 Hz, I was able to get about 10 hours and 2 minutes. And with the always on display on, I was able to get up to about 8 hours and 15 minutes. I'm loving the battery on this device, and it's part of the reason, or actually most of the reason, why I haven't really switched back to my Pixel, which was my favorite phone of last year. While I do think screen on time is really important for a smartphone, and those are some great numbers that I'm getting here, there's also one other part of the battery that I think is really important, and that is the standby time. And the standby time on the Galaxy S23 Ultra impressed me a lot. With the incredible standby time on this device, I can literally move into the next day because I'm not losing battery percentage when I just have my phone sitting there. On the S22 Ultra, most of the time I would leave my phone there after I just took it off the charger, and I'd magically find my phone down to about 94 or maybe 92% after maybe about an hour of me just not using it. On the S23 Ultra, I barely get below 99 or 98% just leaving it around when I take it off the charger immediately. Although I am having quite a bit of a problem with my Samsung internet draining my battery on a consistent basis recently. I seem to be getting a little bit worse battery life, which is unfortunate because I haven't really been a fan of too many of the other browsers because they've been draining my battery quite a bit. Samsung internet was the one that didn't drain it quite as much as the others, so I'm kind of a little disappointed at the fact that they kind of messed things up a little bit, but I'm sure they'll hopefully fix it soon. Needless to say, I am completely impressed and I'm satisfied with the battery on the S23 Ultra, which is actually funny to say because I actually have been saying that every Android phone in recent memory has had average battery life. So it's kind of weird that I can actually say that it's good this time around. The Galaxy S23 Ultra is a masterclass in the premium smartphone department, and I think I enjoy using it more than any other Samsung phone I've had in the past, and that is especially because of the battery life. The improvements Samsung made here make it a whole lot easier to buy, especially for those of you that are coming from an older Samsung phone or those of you who are jumping into the Samsung ecosystem for the first time. It has amazing battery life, it has great performance, and it still has a sleek design. And even though the camera improvements aren't as big as I thought they would be, it's still as good as it was on the S22 Ultra. And while everything has been mostly good, I still have my own personal issues with the S23 Ultra as well. One is swapping the 12 gigabytes of RAM from the 256 gigabyte versions to the 512 gigabyte and up. I don't really understand the change, and maybe the only reason why is because they wanted to get people to spend a little bit more for the 12 gigabyte RAM version, especially those of us that were coming from the S22 Ultra who had the 256 gigabyte configuration with 12 gigabytes of RAM. Thankfully, they do run a promotion occasionally, well, very often, where they give you the 512 gigabyte model for the price of the 256. But if they do it so often, that begs the question as to why they decided to change the configurations if they're just going to price the 512 at the same as the 256 with the promotion. But that's a separate story in and of itself. That leads me to the price as well. This is still a very expensive device, and to be honest, the trade-in values really didn't help matters all that much this year. And the last thing is the camera. While the still shots got a decent improvement with the 200 megapixel sensor, I still feel like video quality is lacking in a lot of areas. It's still very inconsistent with lighting, and a lot of the times you still get a little bit of an over sharpened image. To answer the question I asked at the beginning, is the S23 Ultra worth the upgrade? The quick answer is no, but there is an explanation. While the performance improvements on the S23 are great and the battery life improvements are a bigger deal than I actually thought they would be, you have to ask yourself, are those two things important enough for you to spend upwards of $500 and up to trade in your old device for the new one? I think for people that are buying this device for the first time, then you're in for a treat. But for the people who are upgrading from something like an S22 Ultra, you probably might have the same general usability you had with the last device, except you just don't have to charge it as often. At least until the price comes down. Then you'd probably have this answer flipped entirely on its head. But anyway, I want to know what you guys think. What do you guys think about the S23 Ultra? Do you like the phone? Do you have it now? What's your experience with it? Are you looking to get one in the future? Make sure to comment below. And if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. It'll really help me out a lot. And with all that done, I will see you guys in the next one.